Mitra Fabian, sculptor and installation artist. Her vision and creative process brought about this unique experience that combines her hybrid sculptures with an eerie, burned-out enclosure and the accompanying soundscape. It's an expression of her experience of living in the Santa Cruz Mountains during a perilous time of fires and storms. While there's evidence of destruction, there's also the promise of hope. The conversation today will delve into her personal experience while also contextualizing the environmental impacts, causes, and the ongoing response to our climate and land management. Mitra was born in Iran and raised in Boston. She received a BA in art with an anthropology minor from Kenyon College in Ohio and relocated to Los Angeles in 1996 and began to show her work both locally and nationally. She returned to school in 2002 to earn an MFA from Cal State University Northridge and has been living and working in the Bay Area for many years now. She is a professor at West Valley College teaching sculpture and ceramics and is a strong supporter of our work here at NUNU, and we're very honored to have her exhibition and this program here today. And our other guest is Melisa Perez. She's a field operations manager with the Sempervirens Fund. She has an extensive experience in land stewardship, habitat restoration, community engagement, and vegetation management across Silicon Valley. She completed a master's degree focused on environmental management from the University of San Francisco. And I'm going to hand it over to them to tell us a little bit more about themselves and their work, and then we'll get started on the conversation. And we do hope to have some interaction and questions from all of you, so thank you very much.
Hello everyone. My name is Melisa Cambron, Perez. I am with Sempervirens Fund. I'm the field operations manager within the stewardship team. What does that mean? It really just means I'm one of the key employees who's really on the ground doing the restoration work. A little bit about myself originally is I'm from Chicago, born and raised. I moved to California a decade ago, and since coming here, I've always really been involved in various environmental nonprofits just doing different types of restoration work, community engagement work. But just in terms of my interest, land management has really been something that's almost really involved my family. My grandpa in Mexico owned a lot of terrain throughout the mountains, and my family is very involved in replanting pine trees. So land management, even though obviously it's like 4 or 5 years old when I was living back months ago, I didn't understand it. It was always been a part of my life. I was actually telling Rob recently that I grew up with my grandpa taking us out with belts full of little pine trees to plant, and because we had to reforest this, I had no idea what that meant. I just knew that I was hiking up a mountain with a bunch of trees stuck to my hands. And at the time, I wasn't probably the biggest fan, but even in Chicago, I decided to follow kind of an ecological course in terms of my studies. I got a bachelor in biology at Lake Forest College, a small liberal arts school, and all I really knew was that I wanted to be outdoors. I didn't really know what that meant in terms of my profession. They don't really tell you if you want to go the route of biology, what there is in the world, if it's not research or if it's not medical. So for me, I was like, I just want to be outside. I don't know what that means. So I really delved into the world of internships, opportunities. Once I graduated college, I said, I need to leave Illinois. It's a beautiful state, but I just feel like there's more out there. So packed up my bags, moved to California, been here since, and just been really fortunate to be involved with various nonprofits such as Sempervirens Fund, kind of continue my goal to just try to make as much of an impact I can in terms of the ecological world, which of course I'm one person and impact can only be so big, but when you're working with such an established organization such as Sempervirens that's been here for 125 years, you really feel like you're a part of that history and just part of what's to come.
My name is Mitra Fabian, and as Allison mentioned, I was born in Iran, grew up in Boston. I went to college in Ohio and then grad school in California. And I never anticipated being an artist when I was a little kid. I went to a very college preparatory high school that was very much about academics and learning 5 years of Latin and things like that. And then when the college that I went to in Ohio was tiny liberal arts. Most people they don't recognize it, but it's Kenyan college. People ask me, school in Africa. So I fell in love with art there, and it really all started with taking a 3D design class and realizing that, all of the art activities that I did as a kid in high school, they were never sculptural, and when I discovered sculpture, I really felt very much at home. And I think because I grew up in a city and then going to college in an area that was very bucolic, like that was a huge contrast for me. And I really started to be aware of our relationship with natural environments, and I studied anthropology as well. And so I think not being a science mind, because I'm really terrible at science, but being interested in the subject, I found ways of expressing our relationship to nature through my art. And even as far back as undergraduate school, like I was always combining manufactured materials with organic materials. So for example, for my thesis show, there were a lot of like welded steel structures, but I would then like dip them in paper pulp. And then I did spend a semester in Tasmania when I was in undergraduate school, and that really struck me. Just, you know, the flora and the fauna were things that like I'd never seen before, and I felt, I don't know if this was just me, you know, looking at a different country through rose-colored lenses, but I really felt like Australians had a very different relationship with nature, and you know, Aborigines of course, but even like the white populations, I felt like had this understanding and I don't know, just more respect, I guess. And so that was something that really struck me, and I continued to kind of explore those ideas. And then in grad school, I was at Cal State Northridge, and it's a suburb of, you know, LA, which maybe sounds like a little bit of an oxymoron because it's all very suburban sprawl, but I was again very struck by like the way that the neighborhoods were built, and just the way that we, you know, kind of cordon off things, and this is my land, and everything has to be perfectly manicured, and then just that interaction between being in a highly residential area and being immediately up against mountains. And that was kind of the first time I heard about the wildland urban interface, and I just became super fascinated with it. And I don't think it always comes out in my work, but you know, the installation in the other room is a great example of where it does, where it's very present in my mind. But just in general, I would say our relationship with nature is just something that I'm constantly exploring, and I do that by working primarily with manufactured materials and seeing how they can express themselves in more organic ways through my manipulation.
So as we kind of recap the experience of the CCU fires and maybe like a more scientific explanation of what happened, but also your personal experience of living in that area. Who to start with? Go ahead.
So I'm sure from already talking to a few of you, I know a lot of us were in the area, very much have our roots down. I do live in Sunnyvale, so that's where I was when the fires occurred. But just to kind of give a bit of some background, that was a time period in mid-August where we saw those thunder lightning storms coming. We had the high winds, we had the drop in humidity. So really just a lot of these key factors that were kind of coming together to make these conditions that were perfect for a fire to start. So one, like I said, I'm originally from Midwest. I'm used to lightning storms, but the Santa Cruz Mountains doesn't actually get many lightning storms. They're not as common or as frequent here. So for that to occur and it being such a wildland area, those conditions were perfect. With there were several different sparks, several different points where the fire initiated, that it just really kicked off from there. And then even a day or two after the initial flames, conditions just became even more perfect, which is the addition of high winds.
So I was living in the Santa Cruz Mountains when the fires struck, and it's funny because initially when the storm came through, it woke my wife and I up in the middle of the night, and we were like looking out the window like, oh, what is going on? And it was, honestly, it was spectacular. It was beautiful. Like the sky was just all these crazy colors, and and it just felt very, very surreal. And I'm sure a lot of you remember like all of the orange photographs that were going around in the days soon after from the crazy glow. And so it was a very surreal experience to go from like just utter awe and appreciation for like the power and beauty of nature to then just being like very afraid. And so we evacuated before we had to, because I just kept having this nightmare scenario of like, oh, we're gonna get stuck on Highway 9 and then we're gonna get stuck on Highway 17. There's nowhere to go. So luckily, my mother-in-law took us in, and I just remember watching the CAL FIRE maps like I was obsessed, and I was like constantly refreshing the page and just seeing it kept creeping closer and closer and closer to our home, until we reached a point where I thought like, that's it, we're not going back. Like it is heading directly towards our community. It was less than a mile away, and there was just one evening where we just kind of wrote it off and just thought, no, that's a nice experience, but I guess that's over. And then that night the wind shifted, and the fire moved in the other direction, and of course, continued to make a lot of havoc. But I think we were evacuated for maybe 2.5 to 3 weeks, something like that, and that so that was the most incredible experience. But there were also other storms that happened while we were living there that caused trees to just kind of come down and cut houses in half, and it just goes back to the way that I've always felt, in that humans constantly try to control nature, and really that's just a futile effort.
And it really goes with my organization. We at the time owned just underneath 12,000 acres. We know that the perimeter for the CZU fire was over 86,000. Over 90% of our properties that we own burned. So coming from just a landowner perspective, where at the time we didn't really manage these properties, we owned them, but there wasn't active stewardship on them. A lot of them was, we had the idea of like, we have to preserve this land. So it comes into the conversation, well, is preserving really the best way to manage? Because especially when we know we're living in a region that has history of logging, and there's almost like a monolith of kind of like how the trees have grown since. So there's not really that much diversity within the forest, which is really what's impacting the general health of the region. So when you had the fire come in and just really rage through this large area, it was a wake-up call, obviously, for the residents who were living there, but also just us as an organization, as landowners, being like, okay, we need to be more responsible for these properties. We need to go in there and be like, how could we have made these safer? How, not just for us in terms of the ecology aspect, but also some of these properties are providing key ridge lines that can be shaded fuel breaks, that can help have more like strategic thinning on it, which itself allows the fire to burn, but burn safely. It could be a difference between a crown fire, which is devastating, and an understory fire, which is only really kind of giving, burning the grass and the lower shrubs, keeps it moving, but at a much safer, controlled pace, which is then benefiting the first emergency people that are going out there, such as the firefighters. It's kind of almost giving them a fair shot of like what they're battling. So really, when this fire raged and continued on for, I believe, 2 months. I think the last official day that the fire was put out was sometime in October. That disaster, even though it had happened, it almost kept on going with what was the recovery aspect, but also when the winter started, all these rainstorms came in, all these windstorms came in, it wasn't like just trees falling down from heavy winds, it was landslides. There was no longer no root systems holding all this dirt together. Everything was just completely falling apart. And that's really where my organization was almost completely in recovery mode, being like, how do we keep managing this? It was like disaster after disaster. One disaster ended, and the next one was starting. And that's really, at least specifically where I got hired on, is we need more bandwidth of staff. We need to hire more people who have experience in just terms of like habitat restoration. How can we help recover it? And just understand that when one disaster ended, that didn't mean the region was done. Really, we're 5 years, going into our 5th year since then, and we are still recovering as landowners. We're still going out there being like, hey, we have to still clean up this property. Even though obviously we haven't had anything as devastating since then, it still is not where it should be in terms for like moving forward safely.
Can you talk a little bit about the regrowth and what that looks like, what it means, and are they the same plants coming back, and how does, maybe go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so, the Santa Cruz Mountains, obviously predominantly red forest. There's a lot of hardwoods. There's a lot of different trees or a lot of different species that are within the mountains that we have in our backyard. It kind of depends on the species that you're dealing with. Obviously, we know with redwoods, they have that ability to really survive burns. If it does get as devastating as a crown fire, meaning it reached the top, they can experience epicormic sprouting afterwards, which kind of, if you've seen the trees that look like fuzzy little pipe cleaners, that means they're sprouting on the sides. So a lot of that's kind of a key signal where this tree might have gotten completely singed, but it can come back. There's a strong chance that's how redwoods operate. But then you also have other species that might not be as lucky, where the Douglas fir, just as majestic, just as tall, just as big. But if you have a Douglas fir that gets completely scorched all over the count, there's less of a chance that tree comes back. So it really just became this almost different template of, well, what was already adapted to survive these fires and what wasn't, at no fault with the film, it's just species or species. That we now have this insane regrowth of these fuzzy pipe cleaners throughout the forest, but at least on the understory side, we also have this regrowth of these fire-following plants that we like to call them, such as one that is a native is Ceanothus. So very shrubby, very bushy. They kind of, from afar, they actually kind of look like Christmas trees, but within 2-3 years time, they can grow up to 6 feet tall. And just now as a whole, you had these understories that were completely burned. There was brief, what looked like an open forest, and then within a year or two, completely covered again. So now it's a different conversation where, okay, how do we manage these species that are now completely changed the forest around? A lot, well, understand they are native, but we want to try to keep them as much as possible, but if we don't treat this, if we don't manage this land well, then eventually other invasive species such as like French broom, which is already very prolific throughout the mountains, is going to continue coming through. So it changed the dynamic a little bit in terms of what kind of regrew afterwards.
Well,
one as we talk about new life forms, that is a great segue into your installation about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've been making organic abstract forms ever since I discovered sculpture. And they reference anything from, like, you know, things that you might see under a microscope lens to tumors to breasts to just, I don't know, just abstract bodies. And for this particular installation, you know, I wanted to continue working with my found objects, my manufactured objects, which are the resistors and diodes and capacitors. And I had been assembling those on ceramic bodies for the past probably 10 years. But this time around, I wanted them to be a bit more representative of a lot of the organisms that we saw, you know, in the redwoods, living there, and a lot of the, we just had like crazy fungi like growing up, you know, around us, the turkey tail, like mushrooms that I've never seen before. I remember right before we moved out of the house, and this was in the slides that we shared during our meeting, that there was just this amazing like purple fungus growing on a piece of wood. And so all of those things really fed my imagination, and I think that's why these particular ceramic forms are a little less clean and clinical than what I have been doing for, you know, leading up to this, and they're more kind of crusty and weird looking. And then also with the animal parts that you see in the work too, that was really inspired by the animals that we did live alongside with, whether they were deer or turkey. But the sadder part of it was that, you know, just driving over 17 every day to get to the West Valley campus, I saw way too much roadkill, and it was just like super heartbreaking. So that's what the organisms in the show are, just sort of this weird amalgamation of the fungus and the forms and the technology and the animal. And so not at all like what we actually see regrowing after a fire, but it's kind of my imagined version of it.
How much do you interact with the animal in your work and understanding their environment and how they fit in?
Yeah, so us as an organization, we partner with a lot of researchers. Specifically, one that I can kind of talk about is the Puma Project. Chris Golmers, he works with UC Santa Cruz and kind of the lab out of there to help track a lot of Puma activity throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains. So that is one of the main organisms throughout the region, and they've done a great job of kind of like collaring a lot of the cats and just kind of tracking their movement before, immediately after, even since during the fire, and just seeing which ones are coming back. So we work with them in that sense, where obviously to work with animals you have to have specific certifications or some protections on that. So us as staff, we really can't be managing them directly, but we work with the researchers who have those permissions too.
Well, can you tell us more, Mitra, about your actual process of creating this experience for all of us?
Yeah, sure. So the ceramic sculptures, to my mind, are not that terribly different than what I've done before, and kind of a natural extension of what I have been doing. But when I talked to the museum and they offered me the show, and I knew it was going to be in this room, I thought, oh, this is an opportunity to create an installation in a way that I haven't done for many, many years. And I knew that I wanted to take advantage of the fact that it's a relatively like dark and moody space. knew that I wanted all of the sculptural organisms like growing on something. And I spent a long time thinking about like, okay, what are they gonna grow on? And I looked up one day and I did a series of drawings in 2013 that were exhibited with a gallery that I was showing down in Los Angeles. And they are these weird lumpy organisms, very similar to what you see in the gallery. And they are either growing out of or tethered to wooden structures. And these wooden structures, they kind of look more a little bit like the barns that I saw in Ohio when I was going to college. But I was like, oh my God, yeah, it's done. It was like right in front of my face this whole time. And you know, somewhere in the back of my brain. And so I thought, I want to make a wooden enclosure. And that is, again, kind of talking about the way that we view property ownership, and you know, that we're kind of demarcating our land and none shall trespass. But then the fires were still so very present in my brain and in my experience that I thought, wow, that's it. It's going to be a burned wooden structure, and then these organisms can speak a little bit to, you know, the wild things that live in nature, and then the possible regrowth as seen through my
And you and your wife worked on a soundscape together.
Yes,
Maybe tell us more
yes.
about
So the
that.
sound component, I have been playing around with sound. I made a few kinetic sculptures where, you know, the resistors would kind of tinker on a wooden surface or clang together. But I've been wanting to do like an actual soundscape, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity. And so what we did was we went back through all of our videos and photos while we lived in Felton, and we just kind of re-recorded all of the videos, and the videos were, you know, high wind situations, heavy rain, like I've never experienced before in my life, situations, and then, you know, birds chirping and things like that. And so we kind of recorded everything, and then Talia did a lot of the arranging, and then I played around on GarageBand and just made some like weird dissonant noises. Oh, chainsaws were another thing that were in our soundtrack. And there's a little snippet of my voice that you hear in the soundscape where I'm saying running, because at the moment I was videotaping a flock of turkey just running down our road. And at first I thought like, oh, I want to cut that out, that shouldn't be in it, it should just be the sounds. And then I thought, oh no, that's actually like pretty perfect. Just to have a little bit of my voice in there, but then also just expressing this fear that, you know, that we had to run from the fires. And, yeah.
Not to put you on the spot almost, but do those sounds give you like thoughts of and experiences that you've had in your work?
Yeah, no, of course. I think almost every single sound that she talked about, I was already imagining something that I have experienced, from the turkeys to chainsaws. At least specifically, let's say start with the chainsaw itself. Just so personally, I am chainsaw certified. That was a certification that most of my team has. But in working with that throughout the region, there's so many experts in the regions who, when you associate them, and I think of them handling their chainsaws, felling trees, trying to create like a more healthy environment, and that can go from contractors that we work with some of the logging companies who have foresters on their team, just really knowledgeable people out there who are really doing the hard work. Like, to handle a chainsaw is a very scary thing, and when you're up against a tree that is been impacted by the fire, that's really a hazard. It sounds a little drastic, but to bring it down, it's very powerful. So when you think about the impact that just one little sound can have, you hear the chainsaw reverberating throughout the day.
Yes.
We can be going out there on a day-to-day like sidewalk, hear the chainsaw, we're like, where is that coming from? Never really know, but once again, it kind of goes to show that we have our boundaries throughout our parcels, but those boundaries almost don't really matter when it comes to a lot of the work that we're encountering. My organization is very fortunate. We're a part of the Santa Cruz Mountains Stewardship Network, so we work with a lot of very similar-minded organizations, from RCDs to other nonprofits that are all doing the similar work, where we can maybe hear a chainsaw or one, and if we know which parcels are near us, we're always like, oh, I wonder who's doing that work, and seeing if we can pinpoint it, but understanding where a healthy forest is only healthy if the whole forest is healthy, and not just these random little boundaries that these parcels become because of just how the county works. So having these partnerships and working together really just creates a better forest for all of us.
And so I'm sure you work with homeowners too, and have you had an opportunity to do more education with homeowners and maybe get some information from them as well?
Yeah, so as I said, my organization, while we own the properties, we don't live in the mountains. Most of the staff is very regional, we're all within the area, but we don't have houses in these parcels. These are mostly just land for conservation. So we really strive to maintain positive relationships with our neighbors, which can be homeowners, just because, one, they're going to be really our first eyes and ears on the mountains, especially when the CCU happened. We had homeowners and people who lived in the mountains calling us, being like, this is happening right now. So that really, having that relationship is so important, especially because that allows us to be like, oh, we know these are people who've been out there for decades. They know how the forest works. They know what they're seeing. So they're almost like, to get that firsthand knowledge is really vital. But also at the same time, we can have relationships with homeowners who are a little bit more on the reserve side. I know sometimes, a lot of times, if they want to live at the mountains, it's not really to be surrounded by a lot of people. But we try to maintain those. We try to maintain those relationships in a positive manner. Where, hey, when the fire came in, how can we connect you to a resource conservation district and at least help you financially in terms of helping you do some of the cleanup afterwards? Like, how can we keep this connection going? So we work with homeowners in kind of like having them be our eyes and ears, where if they see something maybe a little bit sketchy, they'll notify us right away. We go and check it, because we have a lot of trespass authorization forms, so we can kind of have a little bit more of just like safety power when it comes to the responding to occasions in the mountains. But it's just really working with them in a very positive way, because if we keep that connection going, now we know we can work on that for a project where, hey, we have funding to do a lot of fuel reduction to improve our parcel. Let's work together, where how can we maybe work with your parcel that we share a boundary and see what works there, just continuing that work from neighbor to neighbor, or from landowner to landowner, until eventually forest. Yeah.
So is there really a philosophy around preventing fires, or is it changed now? Like, Smokey the Bear, you too can prevent forest fires. Are we still thinking about it that way, or are we shifting our management?
Yeah, it's really been a shift. Fires have always been around. They're not a new concept. They're not the new concept within the last 100 years. Every single ecosystem on this earth, on this planet, has some sort of fire history that relates to it. And it could be ones with very frequent burns from every 20 to 10 years, very long-term burns from every 100 years. But wherever we live, there was a fire history. So this mindset of only you can stop fires, well, we know that really shouldn't be the case, especially when you think of who lived on this land before the Europeans came through. They worked with fire. The indigenous people who lived here, they worked with fires in terms of maintaining this area. So now we're kind of where, let's reintroduce fires to kind of make the forest a bit healthier. We are hoping to have more prescribed burns. There are already some run by state parks throughout the mountains, which really kind of opens up this whole education aspect, because I'll still be in the mountains sometimes. It's a beautiful day, great conditions. I know in the back of my head, because I'm part of like notifications, that there is a prescribed burn 20 miles north. But sometimes if I see smoke, I still have like a little bit of a trigger being like, should I be here, right? Am I safe right now? But I know at the end of the day, no, this is a prescribed fire that is helping the forest. I'll still be fine 20 miles away from it.
That's really interesting. And I'm sure there's a lot of fire departments too.
Oh yes, every single prescribed fire, CAL FIRE is involved in some way, or even if it's a private landowner, they have to have like liability, they have to have a burn loss, they call them. But yeah.
And I know you mentioned already, like, safety of our first responders is such an important aspect to this. And so I think I'm grateful that you have that in mind, and that is a positive that can come out of this kind of work also. And I know we kind of addressed it briefly in a sign there that we were acknowledging what had been happening in Southern California. It was right during the time of installation. And I know that we all felt a lot of impact over seeing what was happening down there, and I'm sure that you experienced some memories and difficult feelings around that. So just acknowledging that we have a whole state that we're thinking about, and it even goes into Oregon, and you know, as you said, these boundaries are sort of our making, they're not the nature's design. So you know, it's great to have these conversations. And do you have any questions about the experience?
Well, I think one of the things that I was joking with Melisa about in one of our pre-meetings was that like there were times when we were living in mountains where, of course, were enjoyable, beautiful, just like, you know, in awe of nature, but there were moments when, you know, things got scary, and I was like, I don't know if we're really supposed to be here. And so my brain always goes back to that, and I think that one thing that Talia and I experienced was that, like, as much as we try to be responsible landowners and, you know, thinning out invasive species and getting rid of like the bladdering trees and things like that, like it doesn't mean that your neighbor is going to do that. And that was, quite frankly, rather frustrating, but it also felt a little bit more perilous, you know, like if we're trying to do the right thing, but only half of our neighbors are on the same page, what then? And so I guess my question to you is like how, that I think I want other people to hear is, you know, how do people be more responsible when they're living in that weed area?
And I think too, because that's a great question, responsibilities comes in many different ways. We have to consider that there could be very different reasons why a neighbor might be deemed as not as responsible. Fuel reduction, the thinning, maintenance, and any wildland urban interface is expensive.
Incredible.
It's, yes, it's very expensive, especially since the fire. There's also only a certain amount of people who really know what they're doing. So I work with contractors where their schedule gets booked up like months in advance to try to be like, oh, we have this project, or like, oh, we're already booked for the spring. We're like, okay, well, let's try to go somewhere else. So it really could be a key factors where you want to obviously try to just keep yourself educated, keep your community educated. There's a lot of really good neighborhood associations, fire safety councils that a lot of neighborhoods have. And in terms of resources, at least us within an organization, we always try to connect landowners and people with first the RCDs. The RCDs, both the Santa Cruz County Resource Conservation District and the San Mateo County Resource Conservation District do an amazing job at trying to reach out to landowners and taking much of this financial load off them, because they'll get different types of funding, but it's usually where, in my personal experience, I would always be like, okay, well, let's go talk to them. What do they need? Like, what do they need to be that responsible? Because a lot of times you never really know, and change won't really happen until that conversation gets going.
I think it's a good time to see if we have any questions from any of you.
We mentioned it costs a lot of money, and so I know how much money it takes to acquire new properties, like
Yeah.
the Sempervirens Fund, but for doing the work that you're talking about, and even fire maintenance, are you always searching for more funding for that?
Yeah, so there's different types of fundings that can help operate our work. Obviously, as an organization, we have an operational budget, but we thankfully are also working with large public grants that, especially if we have a project that incorporates multiple landowners, multiple organizations, that's a really great opportunity, such as like a forest health grant. We were just awarded one with the San Mateo RCD to help do some forest thinning in the conservation easement that we got 2 years ago, YMCA Cambron Gulch. So that's when we're looking at like 800 acres of work. That's where we'll kind of bring in the bigger pots of money. But also we have really great relationships with private grants and private foundations who are really supporting the work that we do, especially when it comes to the aftermath of such a disaster like the 2020 CCU. So in terms of funding, there's very fortunately different avenues right now that we can hear from.
On that note, and given our political climate, are you at risk for faltering because of the loss of maybe some federal funds, or do you not utilize federal funds?
We have some projects that have connections with federal funds that are being impacted, but we also have projects that are not, so it really just depends on which project you're on at the moment. Thankfully, a lot of our projects are funded through private donations, given we are a nonprofit, and in the wake of anything, even a political climate, people were always very generously donating. And the private foundations, again, those aren't impacted by federal increases or anything. Thankfully, also a lot of other buckets that we incorporate are state funded, so that is a little bit different, where there might be some impact in terms of federal, what's happening on the federal level, but for the most part, we've been pretty secure. Paul?
Mitra, you said our relationship to nature. Our. How does an artist like yourself say, this is our, collectively, and this is mine? Or do you make that distinction at all, and how do you arrive between you and them, you and us?
I mean, I do feel like there's a distinction. I feel very connected to nature. I'm not a religious person, but like whenever I feel like there is a greater power, like it's when I am hiking. And I don't know. I mean, I'm sure I'm not unique. Like I will bring that, but I do feel like there is. I have a deep appreciation of nature, and I try to respect it as much as possible. And anytime I'm, making purchases or repurposing materials, it's always with my impact in mind on our earth. And honestly, that, part of the reason why I started working with upcycled materials was because art making can be such a horribly wasteful activity. And that really started to weigh on my conscience. And so, I thought like, okay, well, if I'm saving these materials from the landfill, like maybe I'm doing my small little part in making sure that we're not like continuing to poison our earth and all that. But I mean, I certainly think that there are people who do a far better job than I do in terms of like that relationship with nature, but I mean, it's one that is deeply meaningful to me. And I am an educator, so even though I don't teach anything in the realm of science, but you know, we do have conversations around that with me, meaning me and my students, and so I hope that just through conversation and tangential education that, you know, kind of hopefully getting people to think a little bit differently.
Yes.
I'm a little nervous around talking, but town council had a meeting and about the fires and stuff like that, and they're looking for a manager. Now they lost that. They're saying not to do. I was just wondering if you guys reached out to them or they reached out to you to try to work out some sort of deal, because a lot of people in the community are really, you know, fire safety, and they like wanted $1 million, you know, for 3-year contract. And you're a nonprofit, and if you can touch bases with them, you know, I think because they're, you know, everything's up in the air right now, and I think that you guys would be a perfect fit. So it's one of those things that, you know, I've been going to the town council meetings, and they're just like, yeah, we want this, and they had some money, but now with the federal things, they're getting scared. And so if you can somehow contact them, I mean, I'm terrible, but you know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying?
To build a relationship.
Yeah, because I don't think they were saying that they're looking for a manager for 3-year contract with $1 million to try to group, you know, for the fire safety. Because a lot of town people came to the town hall meeting, and they were up in arms, you know, what are we doing if that happens here? And it was just one of those things, and they said, oh, we'll you know, chip in $1 million. And then last week they just, you know, took it off. And they said, look, you know, we got to cut that out now because we just lost $10 million. And now but if you can reach out to them, I think they would really appreciate it.
Yeah, and this would be Los Gatos. Yeah. And I know Los Gatos is under the Santa Clara County, so this is similar where I've been saying the Resource Conservation District is really that first step in connection. There is one for Santa Clara County. I actually think Santa Clara County might have two just due to the sheer size of the county itself. So that is interesting that.
Yeah, if you just reach out to them, I think you guys are a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm.
And it would just, you know, they'd appreciate it. Any insight.
Yeah, no, but especially like connecting them with those resource conservation districts, those are experts who, that's where you kind of get that first step in, like.
And understanding like maybe evacuation zones and things that are different about the more urban.
And because they work specifically with homeowners. That's like they have a whole usually division specifically for homeowners versus like a division for more wildland areas.
Well, we just had assigning of fire risk in all of California. So yeah, people are thinking a lot about this idea and trying to understand what it means. So yeah, it's a very important topic. You have more, Paul?
One more question for you. Obviously, the fires, you said, we've had fires forever. And probably it's a question of not when, not if, but when the fire will occur again. There are some trees that you said survive and some don't. Obviously, the genetics of the tree is different. Is there anyone doing genetics work on making fire-resistant trees? Whether that's desirable or not, I'm not sure, but I'm just curious about, is there anybody working on the genetics of fire?
I know there are researchers who are specializing in redwood genetics and just like understanding that aspect more. I don't know whether or not there's research for like making trees more fire resistant.
Do we have any final thoughts we'd like to end with, or maybe an invitation to support or
Support what they do.
support what they do and support art? Support art.
Yeah, just first want to really thank you for having me here. I think this is just really a great opportunity. Similar with what you're saying is connecting the homeowner, especially in areas that are the wilderness urban interface, where yes, I consider Los Gatos pretty urban, but you are right, your backyard is the mountain. So really understanding that there's such an intricate relationship, both really living on that boundary, but also kind of a little bit outside of the boundary, but also really inside. It's almost 3 different worlds at once happening, that really having that connection with your local resources such as the RCPs can really be valuable and important. So obviously want to put a plug for ourselves and Sempervirens and just the work that we've done throughout the Santa Cruz Mountains, but also just connecting with the regional RCPs.
Would you have volunteer opportunities?
Yes. I'm the community engagement manager at Sempervirens, and we just launched a new volunteer program at the beginning of January. Right now we have 4 opportunities spanning this month through May, and then we'll have a new set coming out in the summer. And we have some exciting opportunities in line with State Park. I can't say which one yet, but the announcement will come out soon, and that will have to, that'll be related to fire mitigation. So if you're interested in that, definitely come talk to me or find me online and we can chat some more. And I just want to plug one other thing. It's not the volunteer program, but we have our big 125th anniversary celebration at Roaring Camp in Felton, and that will be May 18th from 1 to 4 p.m. It's the Redwoods Festival. It's open to the public, so hope you can go.
And a lot of the organizations that I talked about, such as the RCB or others part of the stewardship network, they will be people there.
Mitra, I'm looking forward to your ceramic exhibit. And anybody who grew up in Los Gatos, in the 60s, the creativity here blossomed, especially with ceramics, over at Old Town. And then Trent got a lot of pottery from him. He was the biggest kids. And also, if you were in like Fisher Junior High School and did a summer class like I did, you made your own ceramic. And every mother has something that's really ugly. And ugly things never get thrown away because it was made by your children. So it still exists. I'm glad that you're still involved with that.
Thank you both. Thank you for a rich conversation, and thank you all for participating. And I hope you'll take some time to look at Mitra's art. She'll be here